Spy Cops Info Podcast, a series on the secret undercover political police who infiltrated over 1,000 campaign groups since 1968. Find us online at spycops.info. Episode 42, Reasons to be Cheerful with Dave Morris. Welcome to the Spy Cops Info Podcast. My name's Tom Fowler and I'm joined with
Dave Morris.
Okay, great to have you on the podcast today. Been wanting to get you on for a while. Dave's one of the core participants in the inquiry, probably one of the most spied upon people, certainly the only person so far who's appeared in every tranche of the inquiry, I think. Maybe there's been some others. You're one of us happy band of people who goes to nearly every hearing and have been following things really closely. It's been nearly 10 years, well, just over 10 years, I guess now, since the inquiry started. And we'll just have a bit of a look back, really, on some of the successes that we as campaigners have managed.
Yeah, so as you say, I'm one of the core participants, heavily involved. I was spied upon since about 1976, 77, when I was involved with a London Workers Group. I was a postman at the time, and I was involved with Anarchy magazine, which is just an ordinary magazine. And then later I got involved with London Greenpeace. That's when I suppose the most significant spying took place throughout the 1980s. And then during the McLibel trial, I was sued by McDonald's. Myself and Helen Steele from London Greenpeace were sued by McDonald's. Became the longest trial in English history. And, you know, a few bits and pieces since then, which I'm yet to find out really about, because we're still getting disclosure as the next tranche approaches. So, yeah, I've been heavily involved in terms of being spied upon, but also in terms of campaigning around the public inquiry. So I'm very pleased to have a chance to look back. What have we achieved over the last 10 years? And in fact, longer than that, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think because I report a lot on the inquiry sort of day by day, hour by hour, I have a tendency perhaps to kind of complain quite a lot about the things that are frustrating about the process. Obviously, you spent a lot of time doing kind of activism in court, you know, in lots of legal sort of settings, particularly McLibel. And you've always taken a much more positive view of what we've achieved, really. Starting really with the beginning of the whole process. I mean, getting the inquiry in the first place was a hell of a success.
It is true that the public inquiry is extremely frustrating, but certainly, you know, all legal tribunals, court cases are frustrating. Hard work, you know, you need a lot of persistence. But if we actually go back before we go back to the real beginning, let's just say that to start off with, the inquiry chair has already made a ruling that the spying operations should have been, quote, brought to a rapid end in the early 1970s.
That was in his interim report at the end of Tranche 1. We did an episode about that you can listen to. I forget the number, but it's worth listening to.
And then more recently, the Metropolitan Police have been forced to make a whole range of grovelling apologies about the behaviour, the tactics used by the undercover police units. So if that was all we'd achieved, it's been an absolute slaughter of the Metropolitan Police and all those that approved this unit, which is the government, because this unit has been signed off at cabinet level by successive governments for 40, 50 years, and MI5 as well. We have to go back to the beginning, which is the women that were targeted and exploited by the undercover police, who engineered relationships with them so they could use them as cover and get information for reporting back. They spent decades, in some cases, trying to track down their former partners, who pretty much all of them had faked breakdowns and disappeared. Often saying they were going abroad. In fact, actually, they were just going back to work in Scotland Yard in desk jobs. And they spent decades traumatised by what had happened to their partners and lovers, and in some cases fathers of their children, who had just disappeared without trace. So a big acknowledgement of the work that those women had to put in most horrendous circumstances. And then while that was going on, we had the family of Stephen Lawrence, who was a young black guy who was murdered by racists, who also spent decades trying to get justice, but particularly around the failure of the police to properly investigate and prosecute those who had murdered their son. And they managed to get an inquiry called the Ellison Inquiry into the police failures, and that inquiry had identified that there had been undercover police monitoring the family of Stephen Lawrence. So that, as well as the women's efforts, really was the background to the exposure of this unit. And then once the women had discovered, one by one, various partners had been police officers, began to expose them. The women began to work together, and then that got the whole thing out into the public, into the media. The whole unit was... So at first the police claimed, oh, this is just Mark Kennedy, the first police officer exposed, he was just one bad apple. Then it turns out there's more bad apples. Then it turns out there's a whole unit that's being signed off at highest levels. So that broke the whole scandal into the media, into the public consciousness, and led to pressure on the police. So initially the police said, oh, we'll do some internal inquiries with various names, but people had very little confidence that would really do the job of really finding out what had happened, who authorised it, and guarantee it would never happen again. So really the pressure became so great that Theresa May, who was Home Secretary at the time, before she became Prime Minister, said there has to be a public inquiry. And that was 10 years ago.
I mean, it was a huge success in itself to get that. I mean, it's taken the Orgreave Justice campaign. They've just got an inquiry announced only just the other day, really.
After 40 years.
40 years, right.
Yes.
So to manage it after, 4 or 5, depending on how you count it, was a massive success. I mean, given the police, there had been a number of civil cases being brought by the women who'd been deceived into these sexual relationships by undercover officers, and the police had been maintaining a neither confirm nor deny defence for that whole time. So really claiming that narrative and getting it taken seriously was a huge step in itself.
Yes, because the police have been trying to obstruct and belittle, before the inquiry started, the implications of what had been exposed. Yes, one of the tactics they used was neither confirm nor deny, making it as hard as possible to get any progress. However, once the public inquiry, once that victory had been achieved, I think they changed tactics. The police started dragging out the pre-hearings. Before the evidence started becoming public, they started saying, oh, there's got to be lots of security checks on every document that we might release. These are all secret documents. The public shouldn't really be seeing these. And the police officers wanted anonymity. And there was hundreds of applications for police to remain anonymous. And for about 5 years, we had to kind of fight through this kind of sludge of legal obstructiveness to get to the first hearings. But once we got to the hearings, from that moment on, I think it's absolute dynamite. It's all bad news for the Metropolitan Police. The truth, started coming out. The media started picking up on it. I think everything's flowed from there. I think as well as that, tens of thousands of secret documents produced at the time by these undercover officers and their managers have had to be released by the inquiry. They're now on the inquiry's website. Anyone can see them. And interestingly enough, this hasn't been an easy thing to achieve. So first of all, it transpired the police had been destroying documents from this unit. However, in the early days of the inquiry, campaigners were pushing for MI5 to be involved in the inquiry. And it seemed to be quite peripheral, but now it's become absolutely central. And it turns out MI5, all of the documents produced by these secret undercover police officers, all these reports were being sent to MI5, who keep everything forever. And they obviously have files on hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people, activists, left-wing people with left-wing ideas. So almost all the documents that now are on the inquiry website for everyone to see have actually been released by MI5. So that's another victory.
Yeah, I mean, getting MI5 in the frame was a real success in itself. And it's not just that these units were reporting, sending these files off to Box 500, which is MI5, the security services, but also we discovered that MI5 was producing what was referred to within the Special Demonstration Squad as shopping lists of intelligence that the MI5 wanted officers to go and collect. And it turned out that it wasn't just happening at like a management level, but in fact, some of these individual officers were having meetings with MI5 to, they wanted to find out quite specific information about addresses of certain people or certain organisations. Really,
or we need someone to get deeper into the Socialist Workers' Party or whatever. Yeah, so it seems to me that MI5 carries a huge amount of clout. They were kind of justifying it on the grounds of, it's all about subversion, which for MI5 pretty much means anybody that's challenging the status quo, although subversion is supposedly defined quite narrowly. People who are actively on the verge of bringing down the government.
Yeah, but we did have that thing.
Really justified the wide range of targets that the SDS were reporting on and infiltrating. From in the early days, the early 70s, they had a big thing about the anti-apartheid movement, then CND. Well, the police particularly were interested in any kind of campaigns that were challenging the police, like family justice campaigns for people that were killed by the police or racists, women's liberation groups, environmentalists, anti-racist organisations. We've forced them to reveal that over 1,000 different organisations were reported on by this undercover unit.
I mean, which has led really to another, I think, one of the successes of the whole process is the way in which so many of us have come from so many different traditions. I mean, you and I are both anarchists and come from a very similar tradition, but so many people that we're working with the campaign opposing police surveillance and everybody else who's kind of campaigning on this issue are coming from a lot of the traditional left or, groups like CND and things, but we have kind of worked together in a quite a united front on this process.
Absolutely. I think that there's a number of different campaign groups around this issue. There's apart from the wider groups that were targeted. So we have the campaign opposing police surveillance that I've been involved with for the last 10 years or so. And then there's the Police Spies Out of Lives, which is the women's organisation as a mutual aid solidarity group for the women that were targeted. They've done a lot of publicity as well. They have the Blacklist Support Group, which is mainly construction workers, who exposed blacklisting in the construction industry, but now we know it went much wider than that, with MI5 being responsible for vetting potential employees.
Across the board as well, the civil service, BBC, all sorts of places.
Yes. There's the monitoring group, which is supporting all the family justice campaigns for people that were being murdered, who were targeted as well by the police. And there's the undercover research group, who have been trying to knit all the information together that we're uncovering and put it in a form that actually the public can get access to. So, and there may be others as well, but what we've tried to do is get all those groups to work together, which has been successful, but also all of the different core participants to create this kind of unity and solidarity, identifying the common concern, which is this secret political policing. And that goes from, quite respectable, so-called respectable national bodies like CND, to anarchist groups, socialist groups. The Socialist Workers' Party, for example, they had 27 infiltrators over a period of 40 years in their party, to MPs who were targeted and had files on them. So I think a big part of the success is getting everybody to work together to prevent any kind of divide and rule. Oh, these people are respectable, we shouldn't really have targeted them. But these people, they're revolutionaries or whatever, that it's justified against them. So basically none of this is justified, and everybody's trying to support each other during the inquiry and through the publicity as well.
I mean, I don't think it needs to be underlined to listeners, but getting such a wide variety of people across the left and progressive movements to work together on something is quite an achievement in itself, and not just the activists, but also the lawyers too. Yeah,
getting all the lawyers to work, because the lawyers don't tend to collaborate in the kind of to the extent that we've achieved, because they've all got different clients with different decades, but we've managed to get all the lawyers to work together and also to present a kind of united front, to do collective statements about issues in the inquiry and the evidence that's come out of it. So, each tranche, there's opening statements before it starts, and there's a collective opening statement on behalf of all core participants given by the lawyers. And there's closing speeches as well, summing up what's been achieved in that tranche of hearings, evidential hearings, in which a similar thing happens. So we have presented a very solid and devastating, very well referenced kind of case, which is unarguable. The police have no comeback, really.
Yeah, I mean, that on the opening statements, because you are one of the litigants in person in this process, not just by yourself, there are others as well. You've been giving your own opening statement to every hearing of every tranche of the inquiry so far, which is, as someone following it closely, I mean, is always a breath of fresh air of plain English about the issues.
Yeah, there's 4 of us that have a status of litigants in person, which means that either partly or wholly we're representing ourselves in the inquiry. For me, it's partly. It's my kind of London Greenpeace McLibel issues that I'm representing myself around. So we're able to speak as core participants rather than relying just on lawyers to speak for us. So we're able to attend the meetings with the inquiry solicitors teams. What we've tried to do is amplify, if you like, the voices of core participants as much as we can during the hearings, with the publicity, in our own evidence as well. Get kind of, if you like, the wider points about these movements that we were part of, which are great movements and should never have been undermined in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. Once that success of getting the inquiry, there was a bit of a roadblock then for the next 5 years, really, with the police kind of
stalling tactics.
Yeah.
More than that, it's not just stalling, but it's made the inquiry hugely expensive. Every document has to be looked at, has to go through 7 different checking, security vetting processes before it's made public. And this is why the inquiry is going to end up the most expensive public inquiry in British history. It's already over £100 million. And the police have also, on top of that, spent about £70 million, defending themselves. Complete waste of money.
That process, those years where there was occasional procedural sort of meetings that took place, I think you likened it to walking through sludge.
Yes. Putting that behind us now, I mean, that was hard work and frustrating, but once the evidence starts, it's pretty powerful stuff. We have all the evidence of our own witnesses talking about the activities and groups and movements they were part of, talking about, the groups that they were involved with and how they were open and trusting groups, and these people kind of secretly invaded these groups and engineered false relationships. Obviously the testimony of the women that were targeted is very, very powerful, shocking stuff. But all of our witnesses have been magnificent, powerful testimony. And then you have the police witnesses, which is very important because the documents that they generated while they were undercover for years at a time are attached to their statements. So they get a platform and they get put onto the inquiry website following their testimony. But also, it really exposes the reality of what the tactics they were using, the hoovering up of masses of personal information about a huge range of people, not just individual targets. Their heavy involvement in groups, acting as agent provocateurs, taking on positions of responsibility, becoming secretary, treasurer, organisers of different groups and campaigns, obviously engineering these abusive sexual relationships, using the identities of deceased children as their cover identity, which has really upset the families and shocked the whole country, really. So that all comes out when the police give evidence. Obviously, they try to deny lots of stuff. They try to, suddenly they can't remember anything. So there's been lots of that, but the things that they've been forced to admit, that will stand for all time, and there's been lots of revelations come out of the police evidence.
I mean, I do remember that when we finally got to those first hearings of undercover officers giving evidence, frustratingly, those recordings were never kept. Footage now is available on YouTube. For that first tranche, the inquiry destroyed it all. There's just a written transcript. But I remember us being there in the Amber Hotel, and it was all being done remotely, so we were watching those videos. And I remember just those first hearings and thinking, oh, they're not saying much, or they're claiming to have forgotten everything, and they're lying or whatever. I remember you just smiling from ear to ear, kind of going, they're falling apart. It's all falling apart. They're getting slaughtered. This is terrible for them.
Yes.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, they could speak for 5 hours and say a load of rubbish and forget, and they can't remember anything and deny everything. But if they say one nugget of, have to admit one thing, that's the only important thing that they said. And that's something I learned from the McLibel case. I remember Keir Starmer, when he was advising us at the very beginning, he was saying, it was all so complicated. Libel and defamation is so complicated. It took us about 4 years to get to trial. And he was saying, you just have to set foot in the courtroom. Just get to trial. That's the strategy. Once you're there, it'll all unfold publicly. And that's what's happened in this public inquiry too. And I could see that unfolding before my eyes in that first set of hearings. This was every day of this public inquiry is bad news for the Metropolitan Police and the government and MI5.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very interesting, actually. We mentioned about MI5. Supposedly, the Special Demonstration Squad had two aims. One was gathering intelligence on public order to pass on to public order policing, and the other part was on subversion. What was hilarious is that every officer was asked for their definition of subversion. Everyone said something completely different. But it was very clear that link with MI5 was right there from the beginning.
Yes, and it gave them carte blanche, really, to investigate anybody on the left or any progressive campaigns. Just going on about the testimony that's come out, or the evidence that's come out of the hearings, that's also generated a lot of publicity in the media. We've had protests outside on the first day of most of the tranches. There's been coverage in the media. I think the media hasn't really done justice to the bigger scandal. A lot of them have focused just on the sexual relationships because that's the way the media are, which has been probably the most shocking aspect. It's true. There's been other stuff in the media, but there's also been TV documentaries and more to follow. So, and that's really generated by us, the publicity. It hasn't really been because journalists have been covering every day. I mean, also the work that you've done, Tom, has been sensational. You've been at the hearings, you've been tweeting, 150 tweets a day, whilst the hearings are going on, but also the videos that you produce. So we've done our own, you're part of obviously our own media. We've generated quite a lot of our own media, websites and podcasts and tweets and press releases and so on. So I think that, again, that's a big success that we can congratulate ourselves on. Yeah,
I think we've used the process of the inquiry as an opportunity to campaign on the issue, like generally, really. I think that's been important. I guess if if any other activists looking to make the most of a public inquiry, I think that's really, I would say that's my personal learning from it, is it's a springboard to campaign.
Actually, I remember during the McLeibel case, we did a lot of publicity, and when we had our secret meeting with the board of directors from Chicago of McDonald's Corporation, where they were trying to settle the obviously it was all embarrassing for them, so after 5 weeks they wrote to us and said, can we have a secret meeting to try and settle the case? And we said, yeah, great idea, thinking we'll record this and get it out to the public. They said to us, oh, you're really good at this media stuff. And it's not as if me and Helen were experts or anything. The point is, they're the most successful, probably well-known corporation on the planet because of the billions they spent on media coverage. It was all worthless the day they set foot into court, because the spotlight was on them, their bad practices, and so on. And it's been the same with this, the public inquiry. Yes, we've had to put a lot of effort in, but it's kind of an open door that we just need to keep pushing that door open.
And I think it's really clear that so much of where the inquiry's gone has been down to what activists have done right from the very beginning, exposing the units in the first place, but also then kind of what gets covered by the inquiry as it goes through the timeline. Really, it's generally been stuff that we've exposed as activists that have been exposed. There's been very few things the inquiry has actually brought to the table themselves. So it's really been. There's an element of them rushing through things now because it took so long to get started.
Once the chair had ruled in 2023 that actually the unit, Special Demonstration Squad, should have, quote unquote, been brought to a rapid end in the early 1970s, and that's, that really was the end of it as far as the authorities were concerned. Since then, we've had further dynamite successes in getting the Metropolitan Police to apologise. So they made a really grovelling apology to the women for them being targeted, and for the police making them go through decades to expose those tactics. They've also made, in the last 12 months, apologies. Sorry, I've got them in front of me here. I'm going to read out. I think it's really important. First of all, the apology to women. Such conduct was a gross violation of the women's privacy and human rights. It was abusive, deceitful, manipulative, and wrong. The MPS apologises again unreservedly to the women whose lives had been and continue to be affected. The MPS also apologises to the wives, partners, and families who have also been harmed by the misconduct of the undercover police officers, and the failure by senior Metropolitan Police management, special branch management, to prevent that misconduct. The next apology. The Metropolitan Police accept that the managers of the Special Demonstration Squad failed to recognise the hurt, distress and anger that the use of deceased children's identities would cause to the families of the children, and the public concern that would result if the practice had been revealed, as it has now been. It apologises unreservedly to the families for this. It is particularly indefensible that many of the anti-racism campaigns mentioned in SDS reports were seeking justice for members of the Black and Asian communities in London, and were attempting to hold the MPS, Metropolitan Police itself, accountable for the way in which it policed those communities. The MPS accepts the corrosive effect this type of discriminatory policing has on public trust and apologises unreservedly for this. The fact that the SDS reported on these groups was the result of a critical failure on the part of its managers and senior managers to ensure that SDS deployments were conducted in accordance with proper professional and ethical standards. It is also an example of unacceptable political policing by the Metropolitan Police Special Branch. So, I mean, unacceptable political policing could apply to pretty much everything that the STS did. And there's further apologies we want as well.
Oh, absolutely. It's been really interesting since these apologies have been given. When undercover officers are then called to give evidence, these apologies are often put to them and they're asked for their reaction to them. And it's been very telling how, I mean, in some cases, I think of Trevor Morris here, the absolute anger that these apologies have been made. I think really
by the undercover officers,
yeah.
they're pissed off.
Yeah.
Because it means, obviously they're all trying to, in a very diplomatic way, blaming each other. So the undercover officers doing all these horrific things, well, we were just doing what we were expected to do. And the managers are saying, oh yeah, some of the stuff was out of order, we didn't really know about it, which is obviously rubbish. And then the higher-ups are saying, well, the unit was badly supervised. Yet they were signing everything off. Yeah, they're all blaming each other, basically.
It's like rats in a sack, really. You just get the impression that the officers themselves feel that they're not getting any support from the unit that they were so loyal to for so long. You'd hope that more of them would lose their loyalty, really.
Yeah, that's the one thing I think that we should hope and expect when they go into the witness box. Why don't they just tell the truth? Yes, it was all disgusting. We shouldn't have been being asked to do what we did. We were just obeying orders. It should be more whistleblowing, really. There's only been one officer who's about to give evidence, actually. Peter Francis, who has turned whistleblower, and he was the one who had been asked to spy on the Stephen Lawrence family campaign. But yeah, why don't they all do that? They have this kind of misplaced loyalty forever in the police force.
I think there's something deep culturally there, I think. I mean, that's the only way I can really understand it, to be honest.
And even the managers as well. I mean, for example, in my case, this is an apology we're still seeking, that hasn't been made yet, the collaboration between the police and McDonald's. And I could go into great detail, and I have done in my statements about it. The managers were saying, well, it must have been, to have that kind of collaboration, it must have been authorised at commander level. Have any of the commanders admitted that this was being authorised? Not yet, and they're about to give evidence in the next tranche. So this is something we're hoping we're going to get some truth about. And an apology, because actually, the police were heavily involved in the infiltrators involved in helping to write the leaflet that was the subject of the libel action, involved in the campaign against McDonald's, involved with the defence campaign, the McLibel support campaign when we set it up to defend ourselves once we were sued, in reporting on Keir Starmer's legal advice to us as the defendants. And one of the things that's come out is that John Dines, who had infiltrated London Greenpeace and engineered this relationship with Helen Steele, who became one of the McLibel defendants with me, he was, quote unquote, omitted from the writ. So somebody decided, I mean, he was clearly going to be sued by McDonald's, and somebody intervened to prevent that happening. And the document that revealed that, which was actually written by Bob Lambert, another infiltrator of London Greenpeace, who became a manager of the unit in later years, he said in that document, and this came out in the previous tranche, that if we ever discovered this, we could force the Metropolitan Police, possibly the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, to give evidence during the McLibel trial. This would have destroyed the SDS, absolutely. Possibly brought an end to the McLibel trial itself, which would have been declared an abuse of process because the police had been concealing their collaboration and interference with that legal process. They concealed it to the judge in charge of the trial, to the appeal courts, and to the European Court of Human Rights. So this is quite serious. So, that's an apology we're waiting for. And I think we need an apology also from the Home Office and the government for signing off on this unit for so many decades.
Interesting. You mentioned those two officers there, Lambert and Dines, Bob Robertson and John Barker, as the cover names they both used. Both were confronted. You were involved in confronting Bob Lambert, and then John Dines was confronted by Helen Steele all the way in Australia. Where
yeah, she found out that where he was living, and it took her 30 years to do that, and that he was advising. He was some kind of a quite senior advisor to the police. In Australia. She found out that on this particular day he was meeting over 100 officers from India they were on some kind of course in Australia that he was leading.
On ethics, I believe.
Ethics, but
Policing
also
ethics.
on some kind of undercover related tactics. She flew out to Australia and challenged him face to face in the airport. He's since given a statement to the inquiry basically saying that he used her for his cover. The lawyer in charge of the inquiry, the counsel to the inquiry, described his statement as cold, calculating, emotional and sexual exploitation. They were obviously shocked themselves, and this is a neutral lawyer who works with the chair. Just how manipulative this unit was becoming.
Yeah, I mean, it's he did give a statement to the inquiry because he lives in Australia. John Dines was able to refuse to come and give evidence in person, something which many former undercover officers have managed to get out of in various different ways, which is frustrating. But I always feel every officer who does give evidence and gets that spotlight shone upon them, that's a success in itself.
Absolutely, yeah. I think what's come out of this inquiry and what's the big success is the question is what history will judge. Who was on the right side of history? And if we look at all the people all the movements that were targeted, these so-called extremist movements that were targeted by the SDS. Let's go through them. The Vietnam War. They were launched to try to undermine the movement against the Vietnam War. Everybody now knows the Vietnam War was an utter disaster.
Britain didn't commit troops on the ground, which they would, let's be clear, the government at the time would have loved to do, and it was only because of the popular opposition to the war in the UK that they were unable to commit to that for their US allies.
So the Vietnam War was a disaster. They then targeted the anti-apartheid movement. Anti-apartheid is absolutely, it was abolished. Apartheid was abolished in South Africa, and Nelson Mandela, who was described by Margaret Thatcher as a terrorist, became president of South Africa. The poll tax, which I gave testimony about, had to be scrapped. It was unenforceable, recognised to be the most unpopular piece of legislation probably in history. They targeted Greenham Common. They're obsessed with Greenham Common in the early 1980s and the protests against the sighting of cruise missiles. There were blockades and protests all over the country. That movement was successful. We don't have cruise missiles sighted in the UK. US missiles.
On the poll tax thing, because we've had, the way the inquiries work, for some periods, I remember during Tranche 1 when we were looking at the anti-apartheid movement and the blocking of the British and Irish Lions tour to South Africa in the early 70s, I felt like we were outside the Star Hotel where that blockade took place for about a week, going over what was very small, action by a small group of activists. Yet when it came to the poll tax campaign, I mean, you were questioned on it, but it was just you.
I think it's got to the point they want to get this all over as quickly as possible, so they're kind of skating through the rest of the evidence. However, I just want to go back. Their targeting of the anti-apartheid movement resulted in an acknowledged miscarriage of justice. Now, this is becoming a feature. There's been other miscarriages of justice where police infiltrators have been involved with some action that resulted in a legal, hearing, and they didn't disclose. So they lied and they committed perjury to courts. And that's So there will be more miscarriages of justice identified as a result.
Yeah, I mean, that was the one outside the Star Hotel. Another one was Chris Bailey, recently sadly died, who had his conviction overturned only very recently. It was an ALF action of the smashing
He
of
was set up by Robert Lambert, that's what he said,
yeah.
and his conviction's now been overturned. Robert Lambert, of course, was involved in an Animal Liberation Front cell, so-called, which he set up and was prominent in, and which resulted in a Debenham store burning down. It's a long story, but he's kind of tried to wheedle out of it. But that's a massive miscarriage of justice. 2 people went to jail. And there's more legal cases to follow on that. I'm not sure the status of them right now, but there is further legal action being taken around those convictions. Yes. So, but just going back to, history will judge this unit and the Metropolitan Police and the governments for authorising this. But if you look at the movements they targeted, who was on the right side of history? So they had a big obsession with hunt stabbing, people that go out into the countryside to stop blood sports, try to save the lives of foxes. It's still going on. So for 40 years they were infiltrating, or 30 years they were infiltrating the hunt sabotage movement. It's been declared illegal now. Hunting for sport has been declared illegal. Okay, they still try and do it, and they claim it's for management of the countryside or whatever it is. But basically, it's been declared illegal. Obviously, the McLiable case that we were targeted, that was a total disaster for McDonald's, and we won in the European Court of Human Rights. Yeah, the kind of targeting of the women's liberation movement and anti-racist groups. We now have an equalities legislation outlawing discrimination. So that would apply to the police force if they are going to target anti-racist groups. That would be unlawful. Blacklisting has been made illegal. In more recent years, the successor unit to the SDS was targeting environmentalists, particularly climate activists. Parliament has now recognised that we're in a climate emergency, and no one's doing anything about it except for activists. So instead of targeting them and targeting these movements and trying to undermine them, everybody should be supporting these movements.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And history will be the judge.
Yeah, and I mean, just on an individual level, these former undercover officers, when they're giving evidence, we've heard them say things like, "Oh, the National Front weren't a problem in the 1970s." We've heard them, distance themselves from these apologies, and on a very individual level, they've showed themselves very much to be on the wrong side of history.
Completely.
Well, thanks for joining us, Dave. It's been really good to chat about a bit of a positive spin. I think I'm kind of prone to a bit of pessimism personally, but what you've summed up over the last little bit has shown people we actually are making real successes by campaigning against these units. It is really worthwhile to push for. Would you call it lawfare? How would you characterise this kind of activism?
Yeah, to use legal proceedings as a kind of platform to promote the movements that we're part of. Often the media really aren't interested in, or they're opposed to anything that challenges the status quo, but when there's some kind of legal platform, they kind of have to take notes. And also the establishment has to, recognise they can't just ignore it or lie about it, because actually this is a legal process. And the truth is going to come out. And I think that's what's happened as a result of all the campaigning. The truth is now out, and everybody can see this was a huge scandal. But more importantly, that these movements should never have been targeted. In fact, they should be backed by the whole population.
Yeah, a lot of truth has come out. There's a lot more truth to come. You'll be following the next set of hearings as closely as ever, yeah? Thanks for joining us. You can listen to By Cops Info podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Please give us a 5-star review if you can. Share these links with your friends. We'll see you all again soon. Thanks for listening.